It's good to see you today. I hope you've had a good week. It's Friday. We've made it. Hope you're doing well. Come on with us, 1 Corinthians chapter 12. We are looking in the last few verses 28 through verse 31. Let's get over there and let's read it together. God has appointed these in the church: first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, after that miracles, gifts of healings, helps, administrations, varieties of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Are all workers of miracles? Do all have the gifts of healing? Do all speak with tongues? Do all interpret? But earnestly desire the best gifts, and yet I show you a more excellent way. As mentioned previously, this is the first chapter where we really get into the gifts a good bit. Remember how the chapter begins when Paul says, I do not want you to be ignorant concerning these spiritual gifts. So here he's laying it out in black and white for them. What points can we make? One is this: don't be ignorant. This is what God has done. God has appointed these. And I would, at least the first few, these in the church, first apostles, built on the foundation of the apostles, Jesus himself being the chief cornerstone. This is how God has done this. This is being written for our admonition. This is being written so that we could understand, so that we could know. And a lot of folks, they don't understand because they don't read. They won't read it. They won't read it and they won't be spiritually minded. They get caught up in whatever they're doing, and they are driven more by their emotions, they are driven more by their own desires than seeing what God has actually done. And in doing that, and being driven by their own desires, and in being driven by, frankly, their own ignorance, they're doing just like the Corinthians did when they were Gentiles. And frankly, they're still acting a little bit ignorant, and Paul's saying this is what has happened. This is what it is, I should say. This is how God has done this. God has appointed these. Don't be ignorant. This is what is happening there in Corinth. This is the design, but also he's pointing towards something better. These are sobering rhetorical questions, I would suggest. Back at it. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? It's real easy to read through those real quickly. I believe the point that Paul is trying to make, because they were zealous for the gifts. But again, they were proud. They were real proud of themselves. And they were proud of the fact that they had the gifts. And that pride that they had about the gifts was causing them to look down their nose on others. And Paul says, let's say you have the gift of tongues. Okay, do you have the gift of interpretation? Okay, you have the gift of prophecy. Do you have the gift of healing? Well, you have the gift of this. Do you have the gift of that? The answer to all those is no. No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't have all the gifts. Different members have different gifts, but you individually, you don't have all the gifts. There's a point being made here. You need them. You need them. And that's what he's trying to teach. He does say, he talks about, but earnestly desire the best gifts. And that's odd, because they are zealous for the gifts, and they thought some gifts were better than others. And in one way they're wrong, but in one way they're right. They're wrong in the sense of what they thought was the best gift, because you can tell from later on in especially chapter 14, they thought the best gift was speaking in tongues. And they probably thought that because that may have been the most fantastic to see and to hear. Someone, Day of Pentecost stuff, Acts chapter 2, all those folks who had come from all those different places, and they heard the apostles speaking in their own language. And it's like, man, these are dumb fishermen. How is this happening? And Peter says, this is what the prophet Joel spoke about. God is pouring out his spirit. This is that. The best gift was prophecy. Because prophecy, and he talks about it later on in chapter 14, he says, especially that you may prophesy, pardon me, because he who prophesies speaks edification and exhortation. So he says that they should especially desire that because it's edifying. If you're going to speak in tongues, what had to happen? Someone had to interpret for anyone to be edified. The gifts of healings were amazing, but the gifts of healings, I would suggest all these gifts are meant as confirmation, testifying and confirming the Word. Well, the Word in its more pure form is found where? I would suggest it's within prophecy. The revelation of God's Word. That's what it is. Recognizing the gospel, the Word, the power of God unto salvation. So he says, earnestly desire the best gifts. But those were sobering rhetorical questions, and he's trying to humble them because they were lifted up in the gifts that they had, and he's reminding them individually, you don't have all the gifts. But if you especially want one gift, want this one, because it's this one that edifies. Chapter 14, verse 3. But then he says, I'm showing you a more excellent way. Even the gift of prophecy, by the way, was still a gift. That's what it still is. But he says, I'm going to show you a more excellent way. And that's going to be chapter 13, as he speaks specifically about love, and we'll talk about that next week. But he says, but now abide faith, hope, love, these three. But the greatest of these is love. It's a more excellent way. Now let's back up and let's look at what was happening in Corinth. They thought they were hot stuff. They thought, and to just look at their assemblies, and their assemblies had problems. They were not tearing for one another, as we spoke about last week in the Lord's Supper. But let me pull it up on the screen. Look over in chapter 14. Over in chapter 14 at verse 28. Verse 26, pardon me. How is it then, brethren, whenever you come together, each of you has a psalm, has a teaching, has a tongue, has a revelation, has an interpretation. Let all things be done for edification. He's going to say, verse 33, for God is not the author of confusion, but of peace. Let your women keep silent. We're going to talk about all this in 2 weeks away. But to just think about here in chapter 14, these passages that are up on the screen right now. And we'll say this. When you showed up on a Sunday, how impressive was it with those gifts? When each one has a revelation, someone's speaking in tongues, someone's interpreting. How loud is it? How loud is it? Oh, it's loud. Is it impressive? It's impressive. Were they impressing themselves? I think so. They had the gifts. Miracles were being done. Healings were being done. Revelation of God's will was happening. It was impressive. And then Paul says, I'm going to show you a more excellent way. And then we just go to faith, hope, and love. So are you telling me that faith, hope, and love is more impressive than what was happening in Corinth? Yeah. Did they love one another? Were they walking by faith or were they walking by sight? Were they clinging to that hope? The hope of their confession? The one hope of the resurrection? Chapter 15? Or was it? It was a show, all right. It was a show in Corinth. But then Paul says, I'm going to show you a more excellent way. And that's what's coming up. Hope the study's been beneficial for you. Like I mentioned on Monday, if you've gotten anything out of this, I would appreciate it if you would like it or share it or such things as that. It encourages me and it lets me know that you're following along. Appreciate it. Hope you've had a good week, and I hope you have a good weekend. Thanks for being with us today. We'll see you Monday.